Hey y'all, thanks for watching this video. I'm Justin Dunham from Aircule. Aircule is a organic growth agency. We do content engineering, technical writing, SEO, AEO, analytics, PMM for a lot of technical companies, some MarTech companies as well. So I want to talk today about where these things are important, especially SEO and GEO and some of these other things for technical teams, including docs teams, technical writing teams. I also want to talk a little bit about why this stuff is so important. And this might be things that, if you run a docs team, maybe you already know all this, but I want to cover some of the reasons why this is really important to pay attention to and how it can benefit you and your team. So let's start with a few things. I'm just gonna put my name up there just so you know who I am. So something that a lot of people don't think about is that docs pages are critical in the conversion journey. Yes, we want them for all kinds of reasons. That's our obligation to customers. There's usability considerations for the product. It increases deflections. You can sort of avoid having to get in the weeds with everybody. You need documentation so that people know how to set up and use what you've produced. Like, they're totally important for lots of reasons. But another reason, especially for technical companies, that docs are important, is that they're actually usually a big part of the conversion journey. So when people look at your software and they decide whether to convert or not, whether to sign up, whether to try a trial, whether to contact your sales team, we almost always see that up to half of the people on your site who go on to convert are looking at the docs. And I think as technical writers, we're often not used to thinking about the value in these very important sort of in these very specific pipeline-oriented ways. But that is a very important way to think about the documentation, is that it is content marketing. And I want to show you something real quick, which is it's going to have just some example numbers on it and example charts, but it's the kind of reporting that you can put together. So let me share my screen. And what this is showing you, as soon as I add it here, is HubSpot. HubSpot, marketing automation platform, shows you all kinds of things. Marketers spend tons of time in HubSpot understanding what prospects are doing, what website behavior looks like, what's happening with email, and so on. And what this dashboard shows you, as an example, is pipeline that's been influenced by content, and specifically pipeline that's been influenced by documentation. And what you can see here, and again, this is example data, and then I've also sort of blurred out the specific information, is that docs has a huge influence on, and sorry, this is not example data, but it is blurred out. It's sort of a composite of a few different sets of data. Docs has a huge influence for a lot of technical companies on what conversion actually looks like. And so in the pane in the upper right, you can see literally deals, like actual opportunities, and this is something you can build in HubSpot, that were influenced by a blog page. And on the upper left, you can see deals that were influenced by a documentation page. And in this particular example, documentation actually has a bigger influence than the blog does, even though the blog matters as well. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, or sometimes even more, of pipeline that depends on having high quality technical documentation, because that is how users are making their decision. So that's number one. As far as I think about GEO and SEO and other important aspects of documentation, I want you, as somebody who's watching this as perhaps a technical writing leader or somebody who's involved with the documentation, if you're one of those people, to realize how important that is. And this is also true for the technical content that we put elsewhere on the site that shows people how to use things, explains the differentiators, explains the use cases, all that stuff. But this is a very concrete report that you can generally pull from HubSpot to show the contribution of docs to pipeline. The other thing I want to say, and this is where the sort of SEO, GEO part comes in, is docs are also critical in the awareness journey. And I'm going to just share this tab. This is just Claude, and this is me asking, walk me through the steps for implementing agent guardrails in my app. What libraries should we be looking at? I could have also written, what solutions could I use? I could also ask it to build me agent guardrails, right? But That's hard to do in productionize for a lot of reasons. And so here is Claude talking about the specific libraries that are available, and we want to make sure that your library, your product shows up in these. So this is a place where people are asking LLMs about how to solve their problems, and then we surface some things and not others. So lots of stuff here. And then all of these things will generally, not always, but generally have citations that go back to the page that we're talking about. But if you imagine looking at this, you might click a link within Claude, but you're also very likely to go through and then Google the thing or go directly to the product site, which will show up as direct traffic, but this is important. So a lot of times the citations we will see here are go directly to the actual site, and the documentation is a very frequent source of information that people are looking for. And then that's the conversion part. We talked about the awareness part. And then as we talk about where this fits in the pipeline, I also want to point out that there is a handoff that very few people do, and we'll just like Google the first result here and go to the Langfuse page, where people don't always connect the documentation to the product. So it would be very easy for me to land on a page in the Langfuse documentation, for example, and not necessarily know what Langfuse is. You've got to be careful because we don't want this to be commercialized. We don't want to be primarily about pushing people toward a product. But a good rule is that you want to think about the documentation pages that cover pain points where people might convert to your commercial product that solves a bunch of other things. This is if you're running open source. But you also want to think about if somebody lands on the docs for whatever reason, can they immediately understand what you're about, what your product is? And there's lots of different ways to do that, but think about the integration between docs and the rest of the site. We get good results there already, but this is a handoff that people usually don't think about is like, what does the traffic look like from docs to some of our actual conversion places where people are actually signing up. Okay. So that's step one of this. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the influence of docs from a commercial perspective, which is really important, why awareness is important for why docs are critical in the awareness journey as well. And then I also want to talk about this piece, which is, okay, but where does it actually connect to pipeline? Well, part of it is people read this and then go over to the main site. So you have to make sure you're thinking about how those two things work together and what the traffic flows look like. So let's switch over to talking about SEO, GEO, all of that stuff. And there are a couple of things that I want to say about sort of best practices for docs teams and technical marketers when you're thinking about actually getting your content to be visible. So one of them is, and I'll talk about this next, I'm not going to go deeply into this topic right now. One of them is making sure that your documentation is obviously up to date and that it talks about what you want to talk about and that the site is relatively fast. Those are three things that are really critical. There are lots of blog posts sort of talking about places to allocate your time. This is a blog post from Redocly, sort of talking about how to SEO your API docs specifically, and just sort of, what are things that you can do. And they do a really good job of talking about the specifics in terms of page speed, technical stuff, etc. There's lots of people out there who are kind of talking about this. But there are some things that I don't think that you need to spend a lot of time on. Keeping your content up to date is important because LLMs like fresh content. Making sure you're talking about the things that your customers care about is really important because, of course, it is. And then the third thing is keeping your content library maintained. There are a lot of other sort of tricks out there that people are doing, like LLMs. And one of the things I'm going to show you, LLMs.txt, and one of the things that I'm going to show you, stop sharing my screen, is that there isn't a lot of evidence for spending a ton of time on this stuff. So let me open this link. And this is John Mueller talking about, let's add the correct thing to the stage. So this is John Mueller talking about how no AI system currently uses LLMs.txt. Now I will update my screen here so that it actually shows you when this is from, but it's relatively recent. It's from last year. And things have not changed that much. And I noticed that there's a lot less talking about LLMs.txt. There we go. So this is from, let's reload the page, June 17th of last year, so less than a year ago. But if you go looking for evidence for LLMs.txt, you will generally only find things that are very anecdotal. It's not to say that it's not useful to do, that, you know, if you get it for free, you can set up LLMs.txt if you can easily maintain it, then it can be really important to use that. But that's what I think in terms of where you should be investing your time is content, keeping it up to date. The technical stuff is good, but you can easily check the box on all those things, or somewhat easily. And it's really there about site speed, not so much LLMs.txt, not so much about schema markup, but site speed showing up in LLMs, and talking about the things that your users want to talk about. Okay, so let's talk about tools for content teams to kind of, and technical content teams on the doc side, or sort of writing for the blog or DevRel, to keep their stuff up to date. One of the main things, there are lots of different ways to do this. One of the main things that we like to use is, of course, we've got the ércule app. And what the ércule app does is it indexes your entire library and shows you what the best performing stuff is, what's declining in terms of what people are looking at, what is your star content that's getting a lot of traffic and exposure and engagement. And so the ércule app is free. You can check it out, and it's on our site, ércule.com. And it's a really good way to very quickly get a view of how are we doing in terms of what our star content is, what is declining. You can create custom collections around specific topics. Oh, I only want to see our integration pages. I only want to see our pages that are about, our APIs, whatever it is. You can easily build that stuff and get a sense of what things look like. And what you're going to want to do there is be paying attention to what are pages that are declining in terms of the traffic that they're getting. Is there anything unexpected there? And for things that are stars, and definitely things that are getting lots of engagement, what can we do to make sure we're monitoring those pages and make sure that those pages maybe have commercial counterparts on the main site that we're talking about, or are things that are features we want to make sure are exposed to users, or are things that we want to create more documentation, more use cases, all of that around. So this is where the ércule app can be useful, is thinking about your docs as a content system and thinking about your technical content generally as part of the system. So that's number one. Another tool that we really like to use is what we call a content linter. And of course, there's the concept of a linter and sort of code hygiene and using the right formatting and talking about things the right way. So what a content linter can do for you is it can actually go through and let you query all of your individual content and understand, okay, here's what the topic is, here's what the type it is in terms of if you're using a docs framework, here's the level, here's when it was published and updated. And there are other tools for this, but as a basic thing, can we flag all the stuff that needs to be updated and look at a graph of how recently all of our stuff was updated? Can we look at that graph by topic? Can we look at that graph by have our star pages from the ércule app really been updated? Is anybody doing anything about our declining pages? We're launching a new feature related to a specific topic. Is everything there? So you can take the ércule app and then drop the output in the content linter and ask questions of your content. So this is another really good way to understand this. And okay, so the next question is, how do I build this? How do I build something like this? There are a couple different ways to do that. One is we use N8N, which is a workflow build, no-code workflow builder. And what we do to generate a document like that is we go through and build a scraper, which is this one here, extract article HTML. And then we go through all the individual pieces and we have queries for all these. You can see a little OpenAI logo. And we're asking ChatGPT or Claude to take that scraped output of the page, to tell us information about what area it's in, what level it's at, whatever other stuff that we want to know. And then what we're doing is getting that response, getting that classification back, and pushing it back to that sheet that I showed you, which is all the way down here, update row and sheet. So a content linter can be really useful for this, and you can use it in many, many different ways. You can use a content linter to check messaging. You can use it to check versioning and, are we talking about certain versions the way we want to, and what percentage of our content library is such and such a version or whatever it is. You can use it to look at images. One of the things that we do in that sheet I showed you is go through the page and go through each image to catalog what the image is about and whether it needs to be updated. So lots and lots of stuff like that. You can also do things like SEO best practices, like are we cross-linking? Are we linking people to the main site, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a tool that you can use. So there's the ércule app for understanding your content system, and then there are these content linters. And then the last thing I'll say, if you really want to get deep into this, is yes, we build stuff in this tool N8N, but sometimes we go a little bit further and we start building stuff in Python to do this. And I'm going to try sharing this with you again. And let's add to stage. Oops, that's not right. Let's present. The screen. I'm going to switch over to Z, which is my sort of preferred IDE for this at the moment. But what you can see here is not only in this case, we're updating existing content, which can be a use case for this, especially if they're relatively minor updates. But you can also do things like taking your N8N workflow that we just showed, you can mock it up there, drop it into Claude, and then have Claude write you Python to actually do the work. And there are lots of these that we have as kind of examples, but with something like this, you can then also easily go into your IDE, and if something doesn't work, or you want to change a query or whatever it is, your HTTP scraping's not working or whatever it is, you can change this, and then you're just running a Python script. And Google just released their Workspace MCP, which is great, and lots of things you can do there. But something to think about in relation to how do I operationalize this, you can use N8N, you can use the ércule app, and if you really want to get advanced, spending some time writing some Python for this is actually relatively easy now, because you can prototype in these other tools, see if they're doing generally what you want, build a Google Sheet, and then bring that into Claude or your preferred LLM to write you a script that will actually do these things that you want. And then you're thinking about it as a real content system. So you're not thinking about SEO and GEO as this like, okay, this is something somebody else is doing, and I have these very specific visibility requirements, and I have to produce a lot of slop to, maybe hit them. Then you're thinking about your technical documentation as a system where you're looking at different performance segments, you're running tests against those things to see, what's passing our performance metrics or not. And then we can also build things that sort of take action or try to remediate problems that we're solving. So this is the real beauty of looking at something that's a content system, is you can apply all these tools that we use for code to the actual content that we have. So that's my stream for today, which is content as code, thinking about content as code, thinking about marketing, thinking about it as something that is susceptible to measurement and managing as a system and ensuring quality and building tests. And this can be really helpful for technical content teams, not just because the bar is higher for them, not just because for docs, there's a really close relationship between the quality of the docs and the pipeline that you drive, but also because technical content marketers and technical teams are very well positioned to execute some of these things and shift the way they think about their content so it's more managed as a system, and now we have the tools to do that. And that all has wonderful effects on your SEO and GEO because you're thinking about your visibility and you're keeping things up to date, which is a big part of the things that LLMs care about and Google cares about. Thanks for checking this out. That is SEO and GEO for content teams / content as code. Let me listen if you have any questions. Put my name up here again, and you can find us at ércule.com. And if you go to ércule.com, the app that I showed you for indexing your library is totally free. You can check it out and see what you think. All right, thanks. See you next time.